Hi, and welcome to my channel. Welcome back. Today I'm doing a talk through of this painting. It is a 16 by 20 still life. It's a setup that I actually set up last February earlier this year. But I really like the setup a lot. I love the Motorola phone and I wanted to have one more whack at it. So it's Valentine's in October. But yeah, this is really fun. I managed to record pretty much the whole process. I wanted to talk through a little bit about how I put this together, about my still life process, some other things. Hopefully there's some helpful information for you guys. And if you don't really care, you can just watch and see this painting come together, and that's kind of fun too. But yeah, thanks for being here, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy. Okay, so I'm just starting out here with a primed canvas. I get a lot of questions about why I prime with a bright color, and I've answered it about 10 different ways at this point. But I will say for this specific painting, I chose a bright green color because the majority of the painting is vibrant reds and pinks. And while I don't have too much green like actually in the composition itself, when I'm painting over the table color or the background color, I leave a little bit of the green peeking through because I think it does some interesting things with simultaneous contrast, which is just the idea that if you have two equal saturation opposite colors, it sort of amps up the other color. And so in this case, the little hints of green being left behind will just kind of play up the reds and the pinks, and it's not a huge choice. It's not like when I explain it, it feels like I'm writing like a thesis paper on it, but it's just, if I'm going to put in the time to put in a background color, a lot of times I'll try really hard to find something that complements. It's as simple as that. And so yeah, that's why it's green. And then I went in here this time. I usually draw first, but I'm pretty familiar with this composition. I've done a couple of still lifes with several of these objects before, both in a similar arrangement and in various other still lifes. So I just went ahead and went in with the form, the shadow, and then I'm just now drawing in. I'm using alizarin crimson. That's kind of been my go-to redraw color recently. Yeah, and I'm just refining. I really like kind of the life and energy that initial drawing gives me, especially when I go in really loose with big strokes. I think it looks, I don't know, more lifelike when I do that. But anyways, I'm going here. As you can see, I switched up my redraw color a little. Sometimes if you're having a hard time telling what you're drawing because the redraw line is similar to the objects you're painting, I'll just switch it up. And I think I started adding yellow, and that's kind of where I'm at now. But yeah, I'm just following that and adding in all of my shapes. Another thing I get asked a lot about is, do I take my own reference photos? And where do I find my inspiration and questions like that. And yeah, I definitely consider the photography and the setup of the objects and the editing and tweaking of the photo to be as much of my process as the painting, maybe even arguably more of the process. So what that typically looks like is I will go either to the grocery store or maybe I'll find an object while thrifting that kind of inspires the whole still life. So here it was these Be Mine Valentine's cards. They're so cute. And I went and I started to look through my pile of still life objects that I've collected over the years. And I typically start out by pulling as many objects as possible and arranging it and taking photos. And in one session I can take as many as like 500, maybe 400 or 500 photos. Obviously I don't use all of them, but it's hard to tell while taking pictures, mostly because the sun is just so bright. It's hard to see the screen and pivot back and forth. So I just take a ton of photos. I arrange and rearrange, and typically I will begin to pull objects out and really refine and refine until I'm left with like one or two objects. But all the way down, I sort of, this setup, I eventually took out the swan, I believe, and just did the raspberries, lipsticks, and cell phone, and I like that, but I like to have lots and lots and lots of options. Later, what I'll do after I clean up, because that can actually be quite tedious also, usually I'll make like lunch out of it, especially if I have like pastries or, anything a little more ornate. But later, either later in the day or the next day, I will go through all of my photos and I will start to highlight the ones that have some potential. And similarly to my setting up process, it's a lot of like refining and refining and refining. And so I will get down to maybe 10 to 20 that have a ton of potential. And I'll begin to edit those. And what that is it's mostly skewing. I know that I can do a lot of color stuff while painting, and I do a lot of color modification while painting. But I will oftentimes, in order to tell if a composition is really good, I will modify the shadow and lighten it and just see if I like the undertones of the shadow. So like, for example, you can see here that around the warmer objects like the phone and the lip gloss, the shadow sort of reflects off of it and has almost like a warm pinkish halo. And I remember when I lifted the value up, I think I did that by upping the exposure, I was able to see a lot of undertones, and I think that's what drew me to this composition. So I will start to play around with the cropping and different things like that, and pulling up the shadow and just seeing what's under there. And then I will get down to like 3 or 4 that I really, really like at this point. And this is over like maybe a day or two. And yeah, so it's a long process. And a lot of times I'll even go back later and sift through all the photos and see if there's anything that stands out maybe months later. I also really like taking like individual pictures of the objects, like so just the lip gloss, just the raspberry, and using those for a couple of reasons. One, I'll use it for like a teaching tool. So like, let's say I want to make a TikTok and I want to, show people how I paint a raspberry, how I go about the details. If I have a couple photos of raspberries by themselves saved, it's great because then I can just work from those photos. I don't have to worry about going online and finding a royalty-free version of raspberry. I also know that the light and the color is kind of how I prefer it. So it's just easier all around. And yeah, so that's that whole process. And it is fairly time consuming. But the photography, there's a lot of art to be had in the photography. And I really like the photos to be able to stand up on their own, even if I don't paint them. But the painting is fun because, well, first of all, I'm a painter. I feel like I process things by painting. Like I can think about them. I can really become intimate with the objects when I paint it. And I love that familiarity, and I love the skill that it takes to be able to paint it. I just really thoroughly enjoy that. However, that being said, as far as the composition and the message, I really like the way the photography is. Now, of course, there's an argument to be had that there's, that the medium is the message, and I think there's a lot there I'm being intentional with, but I digress. I really like both object and the photograph and the painting to be able to kind of stand on their own. But yeah, so I'm just working through the details now. I really try to save as much detail work till the end because it's more important that I get the bigger colors and values. That's kind of my first reason. But also, I'm a notorious overpainter. And so if I start working on details before I've truly hammered out the value and the color and the contrast and the form, I will get myself in trouble. So I just know that about myself. So I'm trying to work through the shapes and the colors before I really key in to the detail. So like even the swan at this point, I'm pretty happy with the way that looks, but I'll later go in and kind of refine that. I did a couple zoom ups on the Motorola because I know that's really fun to paint, and I really wanted to play around with having like a lot of different pinks to give it that metallic multi-dimensional look that objects have. The pink Motorola razors, so iconic from my childhood, and yeah, I just really wanted to include that. And I'm just adding the last little bits of detail to this before I finish it up. As you can see here, it's all done. It was really fun to paint. I love how it came together. And yeah, thanks for watching this painting.
What even is this light?